today with Chuck Sundstrom. He's definitely an Arizona drag racing legend for many different ways, and mainly for what he's done for drag racing and the sport and the growth and the existence of it even still today. And we're happy to have you here, Chuck. Thank you for coming.
Glad to be here. Feel it's an honor to be here.
Well, you're definitely way up there in my books for all the effort that you did. We thought we were going to lose a drag strip, and I know your passion was there. You did everything you could with a good group of people to ensure that we still had a drag strip in the Phoenix area. And I want to thank you for the efforts you put into it and everything that you did. I mean, it's just I can't imagine us in this city not having a drag strip. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So how did you get your path's a little different than most people. How did you know you like cars? What caught you about cars? Were you a car guy first, or did you get involved with the management of the track? And
no, I was a car guy just like the rest of us.
Okay.
I really was. I started out as a drag racer. Kind of the same story as everybody. Grew up in Upper Michigan, and young age, my parents were racers, and I owe it all to my mom and dad, obviously, because they're the ones that got me started and got me hooked. When I was a little kid, our weekends were 2.5-hour trip to races in Wisconsin. Used to race at Wisconsin International Raceway, Byron Dragway, Great Lakes Dragway. Those are the racetracks we would go to when I was a kid. And a lot of memories, great memories of that. My mom raced a '69 Corvette 354 speed, and that was pretty unheard of women drag racing back then, early 70s. My dad started out, my earliest memories are my dad bought 1970. He bought a brand new 1970 SS396 4-speed Nova, and that was a family car and the race car. 1972, my mom actually rolled that car over at Wisconsin International Raceway. Blew a front tire going down track racing in powder puff class, and we got a ride home that night. I was not very old, but I remember that. Got a ride home back with somebody. My dad went down and bought a 1972 6-cylinder 3-speed on the tree and took all the drivetrain out of the SS car and put it into that 6-cylinder car, and kind of went from there. Was always into cars. When I was 13, 14 years old, started racing BMX bicycles and hanging out at a bike shop, and started working at a bike shop. And I came home one day and was telling my dad about BMX tracks and different things, and we kind of lived out in the country, had some land and had a couple tractors, and my dad said, well, let's go build a BMX track. So we built a BMX track in our backyard and had that a couple years. Actually turned it into a sanctioned ABA BMX track, which is really weird because ABA Bicycle Association was based out of Chandler, Arizona. And I remember being 14 years old and my mom calling on the phone to Chandler, Arizona to send in our points after every race, and getting off the phone and telling us how that guy said it was 115 degrees there. And we thought, how could anybody ever live in that? It was just crazy to even imagine. And, it was kind of transitioned that into cars, obviously. I was 14. My first car, I bought a 1969 Camaro from a guy who was sitting out in the field, paid $465 for it. Took it home and built that car. When I got my license, I had that car. It was my first car. I had a 454 out of a Suburban, tunnel ram, 2 4-wheels, Muncie 4-speed. Took a Dana 44 Rend out of a Scout and put it in the back of it, and that was my first car.
Was it a street car? Did you drive it to school ever?
It was, yeah, I did. I drove it to school every day. That was my school car.
Did you do auto shop in school as well?
I did. I did auto shop in school, went through the VICA vocational program, went and did some state automotive competitions in Lower Michigan, placed in the top 3 in those. At the time when I was in high school, my goal was to be an automotive engineer. That's what I wanted to do when I grew up and I got out of school. Built a couple cars in high school. My second car was a 1930 Model A street rod. Had that my senior year. I had that in the Camaro. Went to work when I was 16. When I turned 16, got my license, gave up on the bicycles. Closed the BMX track down. So I don't want to do this anymore. I want real cars. I want race cars. So started building the cars, going to auto shop, things like that. Started working at a Volkswagen Mazda dealership, Volkswagen Audi Mazda dealership in Escanaba, Michigan. Worked there my junior, senior year. Worked there when I got out of high school. went to community college there in an auto service management degree, an associate's degree there, studying for that. That was my goal, to go through that and be an automotive engineer. Kind of changed. My parents' town took a real dive in economy, and my parents decided they wanted to move out west somewhere and get out of the cold. And
so they said 115 degrees doesn't sound that bad.
It's a crazy story. They actually had looked at numerous cities, one in California, Vegas, Arizona, and at the time, my mom had sent letters or made phone calls to the chambers of commerce in each city. And the city of Phoenix had sent her back a big packet in the mail about how great it was to live in Phoenix, and the economy and the weather and the housing and all these different things. So they said, okay, let's move to Phoenix. So packed up all their stuff, sold everything they had, took off to Arizona. I stayed there another year. I was in college. My sister had graduated that year. She came with them. She went to ASU, and I wanted to stay and finish another year there, and made it halfway through. We made it through the winter, and my parents were here calling and saying, hey, it's 80 degrees and the drag strip out here is running every Wednesday night, and you're sitting there in the cold and ice, and yeah, I'm leaving.
So what year would that have been?
That would have been 1986.
Okay.
So
the drag strip was 87. It was a couple years old.
Yeah. Firebird was a couple years old. I came out here when I was living there. It was kind of funny. I mean, I used to mail order all my parts for my cars from this place called Lopers that I found in the back of a hot rod magazine.
Oh my goodness.
In Mesa, Arizona. So, the first time I came to Phoenix, my parents had rented a house in Chandler, and I came out with them when they moved, helped them haul some stuff out here. And the first thing I did was go out and see the racetrack and drive down and see Lopers. So I think I walked into Lopers and met Steve and Neil, and that was the coolest thing in the world, to go in the place that I used to mail order parts from. They did. Yeah. It was just like this candy store.
Yes.
Wow, look at all this stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't have that where we were in Michigan.
No,
you had to order everything.
The speed shops in Phoenix were all generally stocked really well. I mean, it was great experience back in those days.
Right.
You came out here. What did you decide to do? What was your?
I came out here, and when I moved out here, I got a job at a gas station in Chandler. So there was an old Texaco station on Arizona Avenue, and went to work there. Had a little 2-car shop garage there, and got a job there. Worked there for about 6 months. My dad was working at a diesel shop in Chandler. He had went to work there when he came out here, and I'm working for this guy, and I'm going in every day, and the guy would come up at the end of the day and pick up the money and leave, and see what I did for the day. And I said, well, why am I doing this? So my dad and I talked about it, and we said, well, let's just open our own shop. So we started looking around. We found a new auto center that was being built out in Mesa. It was actually on Main and Lindsay. Okay. And went and looked at it. They were just building it. Looked at a place there that had 2 bays and a little office, and we said, okay, what's it's going to cost? Save up a couple weeks worth of work and paychecks and get into this place. So we moved in there, had a bunch of customers that followed us from the 2 shops we were at, and started a repair shop. So that was in 1987.
Right.
And we had a repair shop for 20 years. We were in Mesa. We were in 3 different locations. We were there. We had moved down to McKellips into a bigger shop for 9 years, and then out onto Maine and Hagley for a couple of years before we closed that down. And racing, I always raced. When I graduated high school, I was going to a Mazda training course in Lower Michigan, and it was a tech training course. Driving down there in a little Mazda pickup, I was 18 years old, and driving down the road, and I'm driving by, I see this barn, I see this Camaro in this barn, and drive by, kind of see the front of it sitting there. It's one of those stories you hear about, right?
Right.
So I go down, I spend 4 days in this course, and all I can think about trying to study for this course is this Camaro that I saw sticking out of this barn. So I'm on my way back, and I pull into the driveway, and I go knock on the door, and this lady answers the door, and she kind of peeks out, and I said, yeah, I'm wondering about that Camaro that's over there in the barn. Well, let me get my husband. So she gets her husband, and he comes to the door, and I start talking to him. He tells me the story that their son had bought this Camaro brand new in 1968 and was killed in Vietnam. And the Camaro was still sitting in the barn. This was 1987, this would have been 1985, right after I graduated, summer of 85. And So asked if I could look at it. We go out and look at it, and it's a 68 SS. It was originally an SS 350 car, but it had a 396 in it. And it was all original. Look inside, had 8,000 miles on it, full of dirt and dust, had some old slicks and stuff on it. I said, would you ever sell it? No, I don't think so. It's just one of those things, we haven't touched it. It's just sat here. And I said, okay, well, let me leave you my phone number, just in case. So I drive home. A couple months later, one night, phone rings. My mom answers the phone. Chuck, there's some guy on the phone about some Camaro. So I go talk to him, and he said, my wife and I have been talking, and, we think it's time that we do something with this car. And I said, well, what do you want for it? He said, well, I know it's a lot of money, but, I think we want $4,000 for this car. And this was, in 1985. I was working at the dealership that time, and so I go in the next day, and I think about this car for a couple days. I can't even eat. All I can think about is how bad I want this Camaro.
You could taste it.
Yeah, I could. I really could. Still had my 69. That's what I was driving every day. It was my 69 Camaro. And so I go into my boss, and I'm telling him about it, and he says, well, that sounds like a lot of money for an old Camaro, So, yeah, it does. So a couple days later, he pulls me in the office, and he says, let's go for a ride. And I hop in a car with my boss at the dealership, and we go driving down the street. We pull into the bank, and he says, I have to introduce you to somebody. So we walk into the bank, and we sit down at the desk, and the guy says, so I hear you're wanting to buy a car. I never had a car loan or anything. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, he tells me it's an old Camaro, and they want a lot of money for it. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what can you afford a month? And I throw some number out, I don't know what it was, $150, $200 a month or something. He says, okay, pushes me some papers, and he says, sign here. So I bought that car. That was my first car loan. So I went back home and told my dad. We drove down on a Friday with my dad's pickup truck. We took some tires and a floor jack and cans of gas and some mufflers, because I knew it had open headers. I had looked at that, and it was 6 hours away in Lower Michigan.
Wow. And
we drove down there. We got down there late at night, about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, jacked the car up, put some tires on it, and ended up draining the gas out and dumping some gas in it. Took the carburetor apart, had a Holly on it, cleaned the carburetor out, and took off down the freeway with this car. Had 513 gears in it, a 4-speed, and a 396. And, no shifter boot in it, and half the carpet ripped out, and drove that thing back to home. And we were driving it back on Saturday. My dad called a friend of his back by us and said, hey, there was races that night in Kaukauna, Wisconsin, where we used to race, and which was 2.5 hours the other direction north of us. Said, hey, we're going to be home, by 2 o'clock. Be at the house with the car trailer with the ramps on it, So we go home, and I pull the car in the driveway. We load it on the trailer. We strap it down. We take off down to the drag strip.
Right away.
And, yeah, so we get down the drag strip, and because, we have to go see what it's going to run, right? We have to go race it. We get down there, and at the time, you weren't allowed to race till you were 18, and at the track back there, and I wasn't 18 yet. And so my dad's going to race it, so he goes out, and he takes a pass with it, and the car actually was cutting out. It was running out of fuel. Had an old Carter fuel pump on it, and would run out of gas at the top of second gear, and but he got it into the 12s, and so we went home, and that was right around my 18th birthday, and I think within the next couple of weeks was my birthday, so we went back down, came home, and put a Holly fuel pump on it, went through, did a bunch of work to it, and took it down to the track, and had a 4-speed in it at the time. Went down, and my first passes in the car were 1120s, 1130s with the 4-speed.
You were hooked.
So yeah, I was hooked. So
are these the cars you wish you still had?
I still have the 68 Camaro.
So that's because that's special.
Yeah, I still have that car. It's I raced it for a long time. It's still street legal, full interior. Car has 15,000 miles on it right now. There was years ago that I decided, I said I want to. This was back when, going 9s was a big thing. It wasn't that long ago, right? And I wanted that car to go 9s, street legal, and so I had a 533 big block I had built for my truck. So I put that in one weekend and went out the next weekend and drove it out to the track from my shop in Mesa, and had a 10-inch slick on the back, and I ran a 983 with it. And so that got kicked out
That was
at the
good.
time.
That was a question
I
was asked,
did, yeah.
The tech
yeah.
guy said,
Alex Ramirez at the time was on the starting line. He said, "Okay, go home. Don't come back because you just ran the nines."
Alex was so
So
cool.
yeah. So that was before I worked there. So, I still have that car.
Those are good memories.
They are.
So you live here. You're a car guy. How did you get Charlie Allen? How did you?
I started racing all the time. I built a couple cars. Had a couple pickup trucks that I built, and built them. Wrecked one pretty bad. My kids was having kids. Had 4 kids. Started racing junior dragsters. A lot of my best racing memories actually turned into that. When I was first racing, we hated the juniors, right? I mean, they were just annoying, and I had kids, and that all changed. And we traveled a lot. I kind of stopped racing. My wife and I were racing at the time, and I had built her a car, and we stopped racing, started concentrating with the kids for a couple years, and we traveled and raced all over Division 7 with them 2 years, and went to Denver a couple years, and then mid 90s started racing. I was racing a lot of the team Firebird stuff at the track, and they were looking for somebody to basically volunteer to be the team captains and help with that. And so my wife and I had jumped into that and started doing that, and it was something that I really enjoyed. And we'd find sponsors. We'd go down to Lopers and all the different businesses, and Tom Gusick and say, "Hey, will you sponsor our T-shirts for our team?" And we'd get T-shirts made and do all the stuff, and go to the ET finals with the team, and go win the Team Spirit Awards and different things. And that's when I met Charlie. I was working with Joe Thaden and Don Gainey and everybody, and Ed Brady, and I did that for I think 2 years, and then Don Gainey had come to me and said, "Hey, you want to help us out in tech, some of our Friday night drags?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I came out and I worked tech. I think 2 times I worked tech, and Don and Charlie had called me in the office, and I went in one day and they said, "Would you be interested in being race director?" And at the time they had 3 race directors, and little did I know that Don was setting me up. Don was getting ready to retire as race director. And I said, yeah, that would be so cool. I'd love to do that. And I had been doing, as the team captain, Ed Brady used to race direct a lot of the team races. And, he would get me in his truck when he had an issue with a racer, and we'd go talk to the racers and different things. So I was, kind of had a good feeling of what it would involve and what it would do. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be a race director. And at the time, I was growing up, my kids were growing up, I was working 7 days a week at the shop. And when I started doing more with the team and stuff, I couldn't wait to get out of the shop every Friday afternoon and go to the track. That's just, it's what I love to do, go help at the track, whether it was racing or helping with an event. I started helping at some of the other events and the track rentals, and even going and helping at the boat drags and different things like that. Just loved being there. And my kids were always there if there was a race. They grew up there. My kids knew where every light switch was and everything was there because they were always there helping me. They knew all the secret spots there. So the track was kind of my life. So I remember my first night as race director, I'll never forget this. It was a Friday night drags, and I got to the track, left the shop, went straight there, got there. We were getting ready to open the gates, and I was nervous. I was in charge that night. I was walking out of the timing room on the tower, and I stepped out the door, and I heard a crash. And I looked out towards gate 2, and somebody had T-boned a car right in front of gate 2. And somebody had pulled out the street from across, coming from the casino, and there was somebody coming up 347 and T-boned them, flipped the car on its side, and the car slid right in front of gate 2 opening into the drag strip. And I saw the car sliding. I heard it. So I had a radio in my hand. I called our safety crew. They were behind the office getting ready, and they went out there. I went out there, and we called 911 and we called paramedics. And so I spent the first 2 or 3 hours of my first night directing traffic, dealing with PD, trying to figure out where to put the racers because they were lined up down the street and couldn't get in because gate 2 was blocked. We used to enter gate 2, bringing them around gate 3. I was standing on the street directing traffic, and there was 2 cars in front of me, and a guy ran into the back of a car right in front of me, and I was standing next to the car when he did it, and I asked him if he's okay, and he was drunk, So I reached in, turned his car off, and took out his keys. So that was my first night as race director.
And all your action was on the outside of the drag strip.
Yeah. So we started racing an hour and a half late, and the racers were mad, and Tech was calling me because safety was stuck out there, and they couldn't leave because they were treating the lady in the car. And, so that was my first experience. Shortly after that, we had, this would be my best memory of Charlie Allen, and my best experience was we were running the pro warm-up, and first big race, and I was supposed to be race director at that event, and I was really nervous. And one thing Charlie was always adamant about is starting on time. If you had a set time for a show, you started at that time. You had the cars in the water box, and you played the national anthem, and you started. And I was in the staging lanes, and we had probably 35, 36 fuel cars there that year, and top fuel cars between funny cars and dragsters. And I had all the cars in the lanes, and it was 5 minutes to 11, and we were supposed to start at 11 with the anthem. And I had Kenny Bernstein, a couple drivers in the front of the lanes, and they weren't ready. They weren't getting in their cars. And there was a car sitting there. It was a top wheel dragster, and I don't even know who it was. And it was somebody that was a no-name, a guy that had bought a car, wanted to do a license pass with this top fuel dragster. It was a white car, and I should know who it was, but I don't. And he had been sitting in the staging lanes for 45 minutes in his car, strapped in.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. And I had told him, you can't run till the end of the fuel cars. Okay, I'm just going to sit in my car and wait. Just didn't care. So I look over at him, and I'm looking at my watch, and I'm looking at Kenny Bernstein, and he's ignoring me. And he's going to say, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to do what I want. So I tell this car, I said, pull out in the water box. We're going to have a car in the water box to fire when we play the anthem. So he pulls the car in the water box, and I instantly hear on the radio, Chuck, and it's Charlie, and he says, who is that car and why is it in the water box? And I said, it's a license pass. And he says, why is it in the first car out? I said, because nobody else was ready. He was ready. I want a car in the water box so we can start on time. Charlie hesitates, and he says, okay. So we play the anthem, the car starts up. Car does a burnout, comes past me, I'm standing on the starting line. We're right on time, right? Car comes with the starting line, he stomps on the gas, and he blows both valve cover gaskets out. He goes all the way down the track, and he puts oil over the whole track. I mean, he's in the right lane, and he oils from the center of the right lane all the way across the left lane, all the way down the track. So Joe Thaden goes out on the track, and, I'm sitting on the starting lane waiting to see, and Charlie says, how bad is it? And, well, first I hear Charlie cuss, over the radio, and think this isn't good. So we spend about an hour and a half cleaning up oil before we can run cars. And I'm thinking, well, I'm done. My life as a race director is done. It's the end of the day. We run cars all day. We run until after dark, and I'm walking back towards the office, and Charlie's standing waiting for me. He's coming out of the tower, and he says, long day? And I said, yep, sure was. And he said, so you made a call this morning. How do you feel about that call? I said, I felt good about it at the time, but I sure don't now. And he said, did you learn anything from it? And I said, I sure did. And he said, good, that's a lesson learned. And he turned around and walked away.
That's all you ever heard about it.
That's all I ever heard about it.
Great leaders are that way.
Yeah. So that's, Charlie, I mean, you hear good and bad about him. I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for Charlie. So
what I found about Charlie Allen is that people have these. He had a lot of things. He had his landlords to please. He had a lot of other stuff to do. NHRA, a lot of there are things that is attractive. I always thought it'd be cool to own a drag strip. I started hanging around more and seeing the stuff. I go, oh no, I don't want any part of that.
Right.
But he really was a showman.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate to do one of these segments with him, and I learned so much about him, that day as well. But I got to know him over the years because I'd see him more at SEMA or somewhere else on the road than actually at the track. But he, I kind of see what the sad thing is in history of racing is everybody doesn't like the current manager, so they want something else.
Right.
And somehow it's never quite as good.
Right.
As the guy we had.
Right. Exactly.
And then you went through that whole process. I mean, different management group, team comes in. Charlie, they don't renew the lease with Charlie. Charlie's finished, and it took quite a while for us. You had a drag strip like even close to what it was when Charlie ran it.
Yeah, I was fortunate to work for Charlie for years, and when I started, Joe Thaden had retired, and they were looking for somebody to take that position. At the time, I had my shop and working with my dad, and shop was going well, and working at the track every weekend, and it was something I loved doing. And they had offered me the position after Joe had left, and I wasn't interested, didn't want to walk away from my shop at the time. And they went through a couple people, I think 2 or 3 different people over the next couple of years, and then my dad had some health issues, had a bad heart attack, and couldn't really work in the shop anymore. Had lost a long-term employee that had semi-retired and was struggling with finding good help and in the shop and stuff. So they had offered me the position again, and so I decided to take it. Took the position as the facilities director and race director for Charlie. That was in 2006, and went to work for him. And at the time we had 27, 28 people working full time at Firebird, and full office staff, full grounds crew,
Marketing crew,
crew, the whole thing. And it was crazy. I mean, we were running 350 days a year. There was something there at the track with the road courses and the lake and the drag strip, and so it was a cool deal. It really was. Great sponsorship from Ford. That was 2006. We all know what happened in 2007. Everything really crashed, and so things changed. I was fortunate to stay with Charlie, and we cut back to about half of the people we had over the next couple of years, and really started re-looking at things and changing things, and kept it going throughout that that big crash with the economy, and got through all that. My kids started racing. I was still racing some, but not much, with my kids racing juniors and then working at the track. And, I miss the racing part, but, I never regretted it. I just love what I do and love being there. So I get in a car now and play around a little bit and say, yeah, I really miss this, but, I miss, when I'm going down the track, I'm thinking about what's going on behind me and in front of me and in the pits, so it's, it's kind of the same thing. It's a different thing for me. So
your career path's really interesting. So, we went through the whole up and down, and we, a couple of years ago, there's going to be no more Wild Horse Pass Raceway.
Right. And
a lot of people activated to try to make sure that they could do what we could to make sure that either that was going to be there or we'd find another place, but it was really important. And you were right hub centric, right in the middle of all that going on, and you saw an opportunity where it could still be there. And I know that a lot of things that you did, and but a lot of it was the fortunate thing, I believe. I'm just not trying to put words in your mouth, but I believe Radford had a lot to do with prying the door open still a little bit, keeping the opportunity for us to have a track there.
Yeah, they did. It's kind of crazy. I've been through the final pass a couple times. The final event we had with Firebird was a very emotional time for all of us. A night, and I think probably my 2 greatest memories of the track will always be that the final pass of cars down the track, 2 drag cars as Firebird, was my son and I. So we went out and raced each other, and he had his Nova at the time, and I had my Camaro that night. Wasn't even racing my Camaro. A friend of mine, Rich Lash, was running it, had let him use it, and we're running this show, and we're like, okay, wait. Someone comes up, and Rich comes up and says, your Camaro's in the staging lanes, go run Tanner. They had kind of planned this. So Tanner beat me, but so we had the final pass down, and then not knowing if the track would ever come back, so that was really cool. Went up to Spokane. Charlie had bought the track up there, and I had spent some time in the summers in 2010, 11 with Charlie up in Spokane, which was really cool. It was a great learning experience for me. Worked with some road course and oval track and the drag strip up there. Went up there.
Home of Orville Moe.
Yes, exactly. Orville had left the track. The county had taken it over, and Charlie and Ron Hodgson had bought it and bought the lease and reopened it. Interesting times going through that transition, and a couple of years Charlie did it, and then Charlie sold it to concentrate on trying to extend the lease with Firebird. We actually thought we could extend it for 5 years. 2012, he had sold it. I went back up in the summer, did some work for the guy that had bought it up there, ran some events for him. went up there the summer of 2013 when Firebird closed. Thought, well, what am I going to do now? This has happened many times in my life. Time for a change. No more racetrack, no more jobs. So I went up there and ran the track for the summer, and then came back here in 2014. The tribe had taken over and had a management group. Tried to open the track under Wild Horse Pass, and had approached me, wanted me to help them do some work to try and get it going, and I saw an opportunity to kind of do it on my own. So I started my own company.
This is when the promotion side.
Yeah, this is when I started Go Fast Entertainment. I thought, well, I don't want to go to work for them. I don't want to do that again, and just not the path I want to take. So I started my company, and since 2014. Been involved at the racetrack in every way you could possibly imagine. Just whatever I can do to be there and keep it open. Whether it's renting the track. I've gone from working as a consultant to help them run events to last couple of years. All the team races, Friday night drags, all the events. I actually rent the track and put those events on because they had decided in 2020. With everything going on, they said, well, when we reopen, we're not going to do Friday night drags or team races or anything anymore. And I said, well, you have to. I said, well, let me rent the track and do them then. So kind of done that. Again, back to the same thing. We're closing, we're going away. So started looking at it at that time. What am I going to do? Actually accepted the fact that I wasn't going to work in racing anymore when Wild Horse Pass was going to close a couple years ago. And
but you're saying there is a chance.
Yeah, well, it went through that for a couple months. No, there's not a chance. It's going to close.
Done.
It's going to. It's done. It's a done deal. Started opening a wedding venue and all these different things. I'm going to do all these other things. I'm going to accept this. It's time. Kind of like Charlie did when he left. So, you just accept it. And then started hearing all these things. Well, maybe there's a chance. Maybe we can do this. And that's where Radford came in. I've worked a lot with Redford, so I had started with them, worked with them obviously in the Firebird days and helping them with different things and just being involved because they're on the property. And when they started their drag racing class in 2018 with the Dodge Demons, I would help them on the drag race side. So it's an awesome class, since it started, and it was based on the 2018 Dodge Demon, and it was a Dodge course that they wanted to teach people the features in the car of the Demon. So they would do some classroom stuff, some in-car training, bring it over to the drag strip, and then I would be at the drag strip from the drag strip side and kind of explain to the students drag racing. What is a tree and what are the beams on the starting line and what is it about, and teach them how to drive these cars. And it was awesome. It was just something that was really cool and really fun to do. So I had took over in 2019 that class 100%. So I had come in and I would now teach that class from start to finish. So I was doing the skid pad car training with them and the in-car training and all the different things at the school, and then taking them over to the drag strip. So, they really wanted to keep that going when the track was going to close. So I got involved with Radford, started helping them in communications with the tribe and how can we keep this open? What can we do? Kind of a go-between, go into council meetings, different things like that. And we got them to extend it. They had extended 6 months over their original date that they were going to close. And that date was coming up, and they were going to close, and, we're going to have our final Friday night drags. And, the week of that, we had come to a deal with Radford. They had given us the opportunity to sign a 6-month land use agreement. And they were going to let us use the track and for 6 months. And, kind of the thought from the Radford side and my side with Radford was, we can get in there for 6 months and we can just keep doing this until they tear it up. And that was kind of the goal.
That last race before the 6-month extension, we were out there running.
Right.
And what made me think there was a hope was Matt DeYoung was there. So a lot of people were there. And there seemed to be a lot of Hill River, more than ever, normal police cars there.
Yeah.
Just kind of wandering around, but they were there.
Right.
And somebody said to me, I asked that question, sure, that's kind of weird, but he goes, yeah, we're kind of worried about last event at the track that souvenir hunters trying to grab a Christmas tree, trying to grab this or that. Right. And I go, well, and they go, it's kind of hard to run a drag strip without it. That there was the thing that drove me to say, we're going to do something. It's going to happen. Because the fact that they protected the assets for the possibility of moving forward.
Right.
And then I talked to you, and you shared with me the 6-month deal, and you did a great job. I mean, it was tough on everybody, but Phoenix is the 5th largest population center in the country. It has all major racing type events. It's so many racers come from here. It'd been really tough not to have a drag strip here.
It would, yeah.
And even if we would, the group I was with, we found some other possibilities to build a drag strip. But even at that, it's still 2 years before you could go racing.
Right.
And the best scenario was we kept the track that was already there.
Yeah, it was, and it still is. You
Yes.
know, I mean, Radford Racing School is an awesome place, and we have a great sponsorship with Dodge and all of our partners, and it's, the investment group that owns it. They're real passionate about it. It's a business. We have to make money like everything else, and we're looking at the future and how the automotive industry is changing and how the school is going to change with it. But we were looking at, as the school, the owners, they were looking at other properties, looking at what are we going to do? If this place closes, the drag strip closes, eventually the whole place closes. We have to go away. Where are we going to move? We're going to build a new place. They were looking at different places in the country. They were talking to the tribe about other land. But obviously the best thing for everybody is to keep what we have, so we kept pushing on that. We're still working on that. I think there's we're going to be there for a while. We'll be there 4 or 5 years. I know that.
Nothing's a given.
It's not,
Yeah.
and it's. I've read so many articles recently. There's been articles about, the future of drag racing, and I first read one that it's the racer's fault. I read this big long article, and a lot of the points in there are true. How racers are, and we all know how racers are. And then a couple weeks later, there's one that it's the promoter's fault and the track manager's fault. And I read, okay, I can get everybody's complaints about that, and I see both sides of that. And I've always tried to look at everything from both sides, and I think that's what's made it work for me. Is I'm a racer. I can stand on the starting line and think, okay, what are the racers thinking? What am I thinking from a business side? And the crew that's sitting here, and try and balance that. There's not a balance, but try and do my best.
In reality,
reality is it's none of that. Those are all issues like with everything in life right now, but it's
a jambalaya of things.
Yeah, it's, the future of motorsports and racing is really about building and development. It really is. And that's, race trucks across the country, when they were built, where they're built, it's just they're being pushed out by development, and that's our biggest issue. It's manufacturing and it's money. It really is.
Well, it's a prime location.
Right.
And the Governor Lewis and the Hill River community, they're only guilty of trying to get the best return on the investment for the citizens of the community.
They are.
And nobody's entitled to a racetrack.
Right.
So that's why now, more important than ever, support your local drag strip.
It is. In the Gila River community, they're great. They're, people complain about them, and they're a government, they're a business, just like anybody else.
Just
and
like Mesa needs to make it.
100%.
Yeah. And that's all they're doing.
Exactly. That's what they're doing. And right now they're excited about the track. They see the community involvement. They see the family side of it, aspect of it. We're trying to figure out how to keep it going and make enough money to keep it there. They have a lot of plans. They really want to increase the destination, the people that come into the area, and you look at what's there, and you look at a mall and a casino and hotels, and there's been a lot of stories about building amusement parks and building this and building that. And there'll come a day when there'll be something that'll come along. There'll be a developer that'll come with something that's going to be better and make more money, and we all know that day's going to come. We just hope it's a long time away.
Yeah, a long time away.
Keep going until we can. And it's the industry in a whole. You can't build a racetrack nowadays for what it costs to build a new and sustain a racetrack. It's never going to make the money that it costs.
There's infrastructure.
The infrastructure and return on investment's not there. So we have to support the tracks we have. We really do.
Governor Lewis, he shared with me that the last pass of Wild Horse Pass, he was there for that race, the first national event.
The national event.
Got to take him down the drag strip in one of the.
I did. It was kind of a crazy thing. It was a last minute thing. I kind of snuck in some people around some back ways, and I thought this is really important. I need to get him out there. We knew he was going to be there for opening ceremonies. tried to make some phone calls, couldn't really get to him. Went through NHRA, Dodge, marketing, a whole bunch of stuff. And we had the school, Radford, we had a Dodge Superstock Challenger that, it's a low 10-second car, bone stock. And we had wrapped that car in a tribal wrap. And the tribe had designed the wrap, and really cool car and really neat design on it. And we had offered it to the tribe to use for some of their different promotions and different things, and just to help them out and just to help our relationship with them and help them any way we could. And we had that car on display. And I knew Governor Lewis was coming to the event for opening ceremonies, and I knew about what time he was going to show up. And so I was watching for him, and I was listening to the radio and listening to PD, and I knew he was on site. And so I saw him and his assistant walking over to look at the car. So I was waiting for him, so I went over and walked up to him and introduced myself and started talking about the car. And he was impressed and talking about how much he liked the wrap and talking about the symbols and different things on the car and the design on the car. And I said, "You want to go for a ride in it?" "Yeah, I want to go for a ride." So we're just finishing racing, and they were actually setting up the stage on the starting line to do the track walk and the opening ceremonies. And I jumped on the phone and I called Josh Peterson up in the tower with NHRA, and I said, "Josh, I got to take the governor for a ride down the track." And there was a hesitation. He says, "Okay." So so he said, "Get the car up here." So I pulled the car up there, and everybody's kind of looking at me, because there's people standing in front of the stage in the water box, all these people that they'd already let up there for the track walk and stuff. And so we get the governor in the car, and I pull up, and the NHRA, the crew all kind of move all the people out of the way, and I pulled into the water box, and he was kind of nervous. And I said, "Have you ever been in a race car?" "No." And he said, "Well, you're not going to go really fast, are you?" I said, "Well, how fast do you want to go?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, 100 miles an hour, are you okay with that?" "Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think I'll be okay with that." So I thought, well, I'll just kind of see how it goes. So I pull into the water box, and I do a big, huge burnout. I'm just sitting there smoking the tires, and the car's filling up with smoke, and you can't even see the car. And I come out of the water box, smoking the tires all the way across the starting line with this car. And he starts cheering. He's sitting in the car, and he's, "Woohoo!" All right, game on. I mean, he likes this. So we get up to the starting line, and I launch the car, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I got a passenger in the car right now, and this isn't really the best thing in the world. I'm all about safety, but
it could be a good thing, or it
could be a good thing, could be a bad thing.
Yeah.
But we're in a stock car, and we got harnesses on, and we're good to go. So we ran down the track. I ran the car to about 1,000 foot, and he was still cheering and screaming and let off the gas. I think I ran a 11:20 or something, and he was he loved it. And we crossed the finish line. We're slowing down. I said, "What do you think?" And he says, "When can I do it again?" And I'm thinking, well, I wish I could go around and do it again, but I know I'm not going to get away with that. So I decide, well, I'm going to take the longest time I can to get back to the starting line and talk to him. So we went back down through the pits, and we just started talking, and he starts asking questions. And, he's like, "This is really," he said, "it's just seeing the people here, and this is really a family thing, isn't it?" And the tribe's all about family and community. They really are. And so we drove down through the pits. We came back up the return road in front of the grandstands, and all the people are cheering and screaming, and we had some great conversations. And then we got out of the car, and ran over to Simpson and got a helmet from him, and we got a carbon fiber Simpson helmet, and we went and had a bunch of the pro drivers and the junior drivers sign the helmet. And then we took that helmet to him and gave it to him, and and he just loved it. I mean, he just he was really excited about it, and just seeing the people and talking to the people, and I think that did help us a lot. So
his speech this year
right
was reflected everything I think that he felt. It's I believe he's a fan of what we do.
Right.
And exactly what you said. And I believe that he's very sincere in what he had said, and we need to do the very best we can to continue to support what's going on at the track.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Most of all, these are things that what you share with us today is fantastic. I mean, people got to know you a little bit better, your history, but there's a lot of people that need the insight you shared with Wild Horse Pass, now Firebird again.
Right.
I would happen to be in Indianapolis at the PRI show when they made the announcement there with the change, and
Right.
got Charlie there. That was
Right.
it was really a wonderful thing. But you are definitely a legend, and you're an Arizona drag racing legend. Your passion is there. We appreciate everything that you've done for our racing community, and we wish you continued success in your endeavors
Thank
towards
you.
that goal.
Thank you. I mean, I don't feel I'm a legend. You know, it's my goal is to keep the track open as long as I can, and you know, it's something I'm passionate about. It's been my life, and it's my kids. You know, it's my grandkids. I have 4 granddaughters now that aren't old enough to race juniors yet or big wheels, but they will be, and that's, you know, so I'm waiting for that.
Well, if you're not a legend, you're legendary.
All right.
Well,
Good and that can be good and bad, right?
Yeah,
So,
that can be good.
Exactly.
Legendary.
Exactly.
Chuck, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.